It's a longer academic paper, but it was written in the 50s, so you can still read it. And it's written by a guy named Gordon, and it's about fisheries. If you're interested in fisheries, which maybe you aren't, maybe you eat fish, I don't know. But if you're interested in one of the best examples of the tragedy of commons, you'll want to read this paper from 1956. So I'm making them, I'm putting them under required reading because they'll fit right into the text, not the textbooks, the other books that we're reading, the Logic of Collective Action, Manfred Olson, and that'll fit right in there with Olson, as well as the major concept here. Are we recording? We're online? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's an FYI, November 6th. So how are the books going? Has anybody started the book? Liking the book? Good? You can actually read it? You want to read the next page? Okay, that's good. That's a good sign. There are two books. What the hell are they? The Naturalist and Economics in One Lesson. What's the one lesson? Anybody?
Think about the long run. There are more repercussions than you think.
Right. Okay. Or what we sometimes call the law of unexpected consequences. Right? It's like, uh-oh, we're going to have a problem here. So we're going to get into that particular concept here when we talk about dynamics. And dynamics just means interaction. Okay. Don't get all jargoned out on this stuff. Those books are obviously for your learning, and they're also you should have them done the next 10 days or so. So hopefully those are going fairly well. Any open questions? I was gone for a week. Is there anything out there that somebody needs an answer to? Kind of an urgent thing? My office hours are put off today. I don't know if anybody cares, but until later. Okay, and we're having like all kinds of amazing technical problems with the video stuff. So at some point we'll get it up there. But obviously you're in lecture, so you know where the payoff is. And we'll take care of the video in the future. Those will be posted on the UC Berkeley YouTube account at some point, so that could be quite cool if you happen to want to go back and look at day one. So last week on Tuesday, Claire came and gave a talk. What did she talk about? Water. Shoot, can't talk about water anymore. What about water? What part of water? Oh, shoot. I'm talking about it nowadays. Anything else? What did you learn? Anything good? Anyone? Nothing? Didn't learn anything? What's this university stuff all about? Come on.
That you can't really buy water rights right now in California, but you can buy water options. That's easier. Like during
She's such a geek. She talked about options contracts for water. Okay. And what did she say?
And she said like something happened in 2003 or like that when.
When she talked about Matt doing an option. So she talked about a particular deal, an option contract that Matt signed. Okay. Is that interesting? Is that exciting? Do you want to go into the water options trading business? Don't do it. You'll die. You'll go bankrupt. Anything else she said besides water options contracts?
She talked about market designs. So either auction markets or
clearinghouse, retail. Okay, yeah, different types of market structure. So this is something that's complicated because water, since I'm a water geek also, water has traditionally not been a commodity, right? So trying to push water into a commodity space, you're used to buying, you go to Walmart and say, I want ketchup, you can get ketchup, or let's do an easier one. I want steak. You can go to the store and buy a fresh steak, you can go to the farmer and buy a steak, you can go to an auction and buy a steak, or a beef as they call it, on the hoof. And they're trying to do the same thing with water and make it's serious, that's the jargon, right? I want a beef. How many beef do you want? And so they're trying to do the same thing for water, and there's an economic explanation because we don't have as much water as we used to have, right? So we're trying to treat water like a commodity, but it's running into a whole bunch of institutional problems and sociological problems and psychological problems because people are not used to treating water as a commodity. And almost everything in our society for allocating water is not about water as a commodity. So there's this massive transition problem, right? And that's going to matter a lot when you get, when we talk about things like climate change, that will matter a lot because here's a good way there's a jargon word in statistics called stationarity. Who knows what stationarity is? Anybody? It has something to do with the word stationary. Any idea? No? Alright, let's just do it like this. This is the idea of stationarity. The idea that there's a pattern and it kind of repeats. Okay? This is not stationarity. Okay? Because, I mean, in some ways you can call it stationarity because it's it's following an upward trend line. But if you say, oh, I'm going to, now I have lines crossing each other. If you say, I'm going to study this part of the past to understand the future, if you're in a stationary world, right, you're okay, right? I'm going to study, in the old days it used to be study, I'll study the weather patterns, right? In the winter it snows and in the summer it's hot. And you say, I need to have snow plows ready in February or whatever snow plow season is, and in the summer I've got to have swimming pool supplies, right? So that would be, the stores would stock up for the Christmas sales or whatever. That's stationarity. You can look at the past and you can predict that that cycle would repeat in the future. But if things are moving and the past is no longer a useful reference point, then it's non-stationary, right? And that's the big word now that's being debated about climate change. How do we deal with a world where when the tide comes in, it now floods your property, right? Where it didn't before, because of the sea level rising. Okay, we knew that happened, whatever it was, 50,000 years ago, but we weren't around with our tidal charts. So a non-stationary world is a very, very troublesome, expensive world because you have to make a lot more adaptation. Whereas in the past, we just go back to our closet. You know the whole winter wardrobe, summer wardrobe? I just go get my winter wardrobe, get my summer wardrobe. But now you're like, your winter wardrobe has to get, furrier and furrier, and your summer wardrobe has to get skimpier and skimpier. Who's seen that cartoon about proof of global warming with the underwear on the line? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? So it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller pairs of underwear until the summer is like all naked. So, just as a reference point. So, the stationarity is what's going on in terms of we're in a non-stationary world, and moving water into a different kind of psychological, logistical, institutional space is a lot of work because we have to create all these new ideas, we have to create all these new concepts that people are not used to applying to something like water, whereas we're very used to applying it to beef, for example. And ironically, this is the funny part, you can take a lot of stuff just from beef or from like basic economics and just bolt it down right on top of water and it will basically work, right? And this is what happened in Canada and Alberta, which is the Texas of Canada, and they have all these oil guys. And they put the oil guys, they said, why don't you guys deal with our water problem? And the oil guys are like, oh, there's a water. Water's like oil. Oil is valuable. Water is valuable. So we'll treat water like oil, which is valuable. So we'll just have a market and we'll have prices. And everyone's like, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. It's a human. But the oil guys are like, we know exactly what to do. Right? And they ran into massive political opposition. So you see, this is where that tension is going on back and forth. And this matters a lot in the environment and resources. And I'm going to get to this when I talk about, where did I put that? Power. When I talk about power, which is kind of like next, kind of like now. Well, okay, I'll talk about it now. So it matters more in environment and resource because those activities, those goods, if you want, are much more politicized. Okay, and we don't have a lot of politics around the iPhone, right? Besides the battle back and forth, why does Apple have their contract? That's not a political problem. We have huge political problems about water or about climate change, right? So that's where the economics runs into politics, and that's why that's why the word policy, or I'm taking the word policy in the name of this class very seriously, because policy is about making rules and changes in laws, and economics is kind of like how people behave, and when you change those rules, you're trying to change how they behave, as opposed to just letting people run and do what they want. So that's kind of a vague statement. And Claire talked about that. Anything else that Claire talked about that comes to mind? I haven't seen the tape, so I'm just kind of quizzing you guys so I can learn. Anything? Yes?
Trade and why trade would break down. A bunch of reasons like tax and...
Why trade would break down?
Yeah.
In what? In a market for water? Is that
yeah,
it? Or
that was, like the water was the example.
Mm-hmm.
You might estimate it like looking at it.
In the sense the tax was too big and there was no trade because it
I think when she was talking about the trade breaking down, it was just some general like reasons why trade would break down, but I think it could apply to water.
Right.
She was saying that the transaction cost, if they increase, that your trade would break down. When she talked about different transaction costs.
Right. Okay, so let's look at that for just a second. The general idea. Because transactions costs turn out to be really important. And when you guys went through Econ 1, and we'll talk about supply and demand, we talk often about a frictionless market, right? Who's ever tried to sell or buy a car? Sell a car. Who's tried to sell a car? How easy is it to sell a car? Depends on the car. Depends on the price. Depends on the. No one else. There's only 2 people in this whole class that sold a car.
Where you're selling the car.
Sorry, selling.
Where you're selling the car.
Where you're selling the car. Where's the market, right? I got my PhD in Davis. Davis is the best place in the world to buy a bicycle, right? Because there's so many bikes. And I always go there and buy bikes, and I sell them up here and I make profit. So it's really great. So remember those postdoc wages. Any other? So the car market is not nearly as liquid as you would assume. He's like, oh, there's a market, and you read in the newspaper, there's a market for cars, and there's sales happening. But there's a cost of matching a buyer and a seller, right? You can put it on Craigslist. You got to take a photo. They've got to find you. They've got to email you. They get to your place, and they flake out. And they don't call. I'm selling a bike right now. That's why I know about this right now. And so the so-called frictionless market that we talk about is really nice, but there are always transactions costs in the market. And the idea is to lower the transactions costs as small as possible, assuming you want the market to function. Some people do not want the market to function, and they will try and sabotage the market. There was this really funny thing. This student who was, I think the government was leasing timber or something like that, and the student put in a bid for a lot of timber, and he had no money. And they had no idea how to deal with this no money bid, because he won. And they're like, well, you won. He's like, I don't have any money. And they said, you can't do that. It's like, well, I did. And then they didn't know what to do, right? And it just he just like completely sabotaged that auction because he didn't want that stuff to go on the market, which is not the best of economics, but it's quite entertaining. So, so back to the whole friction idea. Let's look at supply and demand for a second. And there's the classical examples that you guys get is where you have a tax, right? If I want to put a tax, this is our P star. If I want to put a tax, where does the tax show up on this thingy? Anyone? It's called a tax what? Wedge. Tax wedge. Where's the tax wedge go? Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so above, you be quiet. Above or below the supply line? Is the tax add cost or is it take away cost? Adds cost, good, because we know the difference between a tax and a subsidy. So let's call that a tax, as prime, okay? But basically what you're doing is you're increasing the price by this much, right, that wedge. And more importantly, for market efficiency, is you're lowering the volume, right? You're doing fewer transactions. And if you get back and you go back to utility, and I get utility from consuming stuff, and if I'm not consuming it, I'm not happy, then you can see that a tax is about it has a social cost or a human cost called we're not getting what we want because of the tax. Now, the tax is traditionally this area here, and that's revenue, and that revenue, we're going to be talking about supply and demand today, so I'll be bringing this up more often. But that revenue usually will go to whoever's taxing. It's often the government, right? Whoever has the power to interfere with that transaction. You could have a tax if you have sometimes a vendor will show up on campus at some kind of whatever counseling fair or outdoor party, and they have to pay a percentage of their receipts, right, to the ASUCD or ASUCB. Associated Use, how do they call it? ASUC. So they have to pay a fee, like 7% of their registered volume to the ASUC, which is a tax, right, on top of a sales tax, right? So the ASUC will take this and then they'll have a party or whatever, they'll drink beer. The government will drink beer. But that's okay. But what if it's just a pure transactions cost? Where does this go? Where does that rectangle go? In the back. I know, I'm calling all you guys. Somebody. Where does that rectangle go? Sorry? It's not a deadweight loss. That's this little triangle here. Where does it go? Let's just call that a transaction cost. Let's not call it a tax, but let's just call it a transaction cost. Let's say, Craigslist breaks down. We have to go back to the newspapers or something like that. Where does that go? It just goes away. It's just gone. It's like wasted energy. It's like, I just spend all my time trying to do stuff, and it's a bitch to get it done.
It would not be, right? Because if you, for example, had it with the newspaper, and that transaction cost that you have to place advertisement in the newspaper now, then that revenue would go to the newspaper.
Ah, but that's, the newspaper is dealing with this kind of stuff here. The newspaper is this supply curve here, right? But we're talking about this tax, right? The difference between this price and this price is the difference between the Craigslist price and the newspaper price, right? This might be the price of the. I mean, say the newspaper is free, for example, but it's just less efficient. It just takes time to do it. You got to fill in a piece of paper. You got. It's like sending a text message to a friend versus typing. You know, you can type a lot faster, right? But your text message you can walk around, right? But the thing is that if you had to use your phone to type your essays, you would die, right? Or the essays would be very short, right? And that's why my briefings are only one page. You can write, if you write the briefing on the phone, that would be so cool, but I won't give you extra points. So it's literally just a transaction cost. And just think of the transaction cost as a tax. And the transaction cost is, I've got to walk down to the market. The transaction cost is, I have to go to the ATM. The transaction cost is, I don't have exact change, right? They have, in India, it's really fun, they've got they have 40 rupees, give or take, to $1. Okay, so 1 rupee is about 2 or 3 cents. It's not much money, but you can buy a samosa, you know, these little Indian pastries. So for 2 or 3 rupees, that's like, okay, cool, you can have a snack. And then you go, you say, oh, I have 5 rupees, and they say, I don't have change. And they give you a piece of candy or something like that. There's actually a change mafia in Mumbai, in Bombay, and every day the merchants, they go to the bank, and they have to buy their change from the mafia, because the mafia gets there before them, because they hire all the beggars to stay in line all night. And then, this is like completely off, it's not off topic, it's transaction cost. So they go to the bank and they get, the mafia gets all the coins, all the rupee coins out of the bank, and then the merchants who want to give change to their customers have to buy the coins at what? A markup. It's a 10% cost, right? And the mafia is just making money, just like that, right? And the Italian mafia is exactly the same, classical mafia. So it's just a transaction cost. It keeps things from happening as efficiently as they might. Okay? And believe it or not, a lot of economics, we ignore transaction costs. A lot of economics, but there's an economics branch called transaction cost economics. But if you think about outside there, and when you're doing your blog postings and just your life, think about, oh, I just want to do transaction cost. What a bummer, right? It's like how when the post office is like the DMV. When you could make an appointment to go to the DMV, that was like a revelation. You could make an appointment because usually you just go down there with a book and you would wait. And then you can make an appointment and you wait like half the time. So that's what transaction costs are all about. And markets, well, in markets, we want them to be as efficient as possible. We want to lower the transaction costs. That's where computers are all about. Digitization is all about. Standardization is all about. A standard contract, 1 bushel of wheat, 1 kilo of tomatoes. That standard scale, like in the old days, they'd have all kinds of different weights and measures around the world. The length of the king's foot was a foot, right? The thumb was an inch, that kind of thing. And it's like, well, the king died, got a new thumb, got to change all the measurements, right? They screwed everything up. So literally deciding on standardization was a way of reducing transaction costs, and it made everything work better for us. The size of your shirts, all kinds of stuff. Okay. Damien talked on Thursday. Anything else from Claire? Anything? Nothing? Okay, great. That tape will go up eventually. Damien talked about what? AC Transit, my favorite, the empty bus. What did he say?
It's not worth it to have another bus because there's enough people who don't see the benefit, and there's enough people that walk. And
it's not worth it to have another bus on top of the bus we have.
Yes.
There's more than 1 bus, right? How many buses? So it's not worth it to buy more buses?
Yes.
Or bigger buses?
It's not worth it to have more buses on AC Transit, have the ones that we have.
Because they're already empty.
Yes.
Aha, okay. What else did he say?
So the reason they made buses free for students was to reduce congestion and also help with parking shortages. They didn't either because the people who are driving are really far away.
Right.
And it doesn't really affect them.
People who are here take a bike anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
People here are going to take a bike, and those are people that are going to take the bus now. And
Right.
not people who are driving maybe causing congestion.
Right. That's a good point. Okay. Other stuff. What else did he say?
He talked about like how perhaps to make it more efficient, we need to figure out what the fare should be, whether it's 0 or the average cost at capacity. Because right now, you have a flat rate cost of $68 to buy the class pass. And
$68?
Yeah.
For a bus pass?
Yeah.
All right.
But
You have to buy it.
It's included.
Oh, I love that. That's a tax, right? Okay, so $68 from every student, and who uses the bus? Oh, not bad. And it's free, right? Because you already paid the money, right? Okay, go ahead. The other people that don't use it, you just got gypped. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, so since there's no marginal cost for
An
the
additional
bus,
rider.
right?
Yeah,
Then maybe we should lower the fare to get more people.
right. Did I say this before also? That I said the bus should be basically free if it's empty. Yeah, I mean this is the tension between like essentially accountants who think, oh, we have to get our money back by charging the customers, or like diehard free market economists, which I used to be, and then efficiency people who are like, how do we get given that we're, like I said before, given that we're running these stupid buses already, how do we get as many people as possible on them, right? Anything else did he say? What did he say that was cool? Nothing? Damon's a cool guy. You should have said something. Yeah, I was doing research. Okay, that was cool, but that's not what he was saying. Anything else they said? Claire, anything else that she said? I'll wrap this up and keep going. All right, any outstanding questions from their talks? No? Who went to section last week and played the game? Anyone? Everyone? Who didn't play the game? I heard some people didn't play the game. Okay, so for everybody, I'm gonna roll back and go over that game a second because it's super useful as an example of what we're talking about in the class. It's about the tragedy of the commons. So somebody describe me how the game works. The first setup that we did. What's it called? Go fish. The fishing game. Let's call it the fishing game. How did the setup work? Give me the rules. Rule. Give me a rule. Come on, you all played it. Okay. Take as much as you can, as fast as you can. Is that the rule? Did the GSI say you guys should take as much as you can, as fast as you can? No.
Follow your self-interest.
Follow your self-interest. Okay, so you have self-interest.
Whatever's left in the first session is double in the second session.
Right, so P2 equals 2P1, right?
No property.
No property rights, super important. No property rights.
You can't talk.
Right.
No communication.
Why can't you talk? Collaborate. Damn it, we don't want you guys to collaborate. We want you to kill all the fish. Okay, so if there's no talking, I might use that occasionally. The tilde means no. Okay? No talking, because I'm going to do a little game theory later on, and I'll use that tilde. So no talking was the first round rule, right? In fact, I think wasn't that the rule the whole way through, or was there talking?
The whole way.
The whole way through. All right. So, but that's cool because what is talking going to do? It's going to get you guys to start making rules and collaborating and like swearing at each other. Right? Damn it! Took my candy. Was it candy? What did you guys get? Yeah, cool. All right. So, what happened when the first go round, where this was just the basic setup? Did any candy or fish make it to the next round? No. Perfect example of the tragedy of commons. Okay. So for those of you who didn't play the game, let me just set this out for a second. Basically, you've got an area, you've got people around it. I'm making this up from my own experience, so this may not be yours. Then you put a bunch of candy, and you call them fish. Okay, and you say, here's the rules. Right there. Go ahead and your idea is to maximize, pursue your self-interest and maximize your profits. All the candy that's left over at the end of the 30-second, 45-second, how long was it? 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, all the candy that's left over will be doubled by nature, right? Because that's like, the spawning season and all that stuff. I was talking about salmon fisheries last week. So, if you're pursuing your self-interest, you want to have a candy. You forget about that for a second. There's no property rights. So here's the problem. The classic problem is that, you're like, ooh, I like that candy, if I leave that there, I'll have another candy next period. Except this bastard comes and takes your candy. But it's not your candy. It's not your candy. That's the no property rights thing, right? That is the key item here. There's no property rights. So then, and this follows a very classical set of examples with fishing. So the regulator said, oh my God, we lost all the fish. What we have to do is we have to make it harder to fish. So what we're going to do is we're going to say you can't use your hands, you can only use your elbows or whatever. Do you guys use no hands? The no hands one? So that's called, so there's the thing called, I don't know, it's like technological handicapping, right? And they literally said to these fishermen, said, your boat can be no longer than whatever it was, 45 feet. And so the boats that used to look like this, right, give or take, they started to look like this. They're still 45 feet long, but they're fatter and fatter and fatter because they stuck more and more gear and more sophisticated stuff and bigger engines on the backs of the boats. But the regulator's like, shoot, okay, they got around the 45-foot thing. Now we're going to shorten the season down until it goes from 365 down to 4 hours per year. Right? The halibut season in Alaska was literally 4 hours long. You had these huge boats out there with like 80 crew on there throwing off 5 nets in 4 hours trying to catch as many fish as they can. And of course they take whatever they can get. Right? Because what do? They go out of the port, they have massive capital investment, they have massive gasoline and humans, and let's talk about supply and demand. If everybody has to show up for 4 hours during that one time of the year, do they have a problem supply and demand of fishermen, of the crew? Right? It's almost like they have to charter jets to bring fishermen from Vietnam to work on this. Vietnamese are really good fishermen. To work on this 1 4-hour thing and then go back again. Right? So it's like extremely expensive because remember that when we talk about a supply curve, I'm jumping around a little bit, but this is all integrated. When we talk about a supply curve, when you're out here in terms of the quantity of fishermen, right, you're at the highest prices here. If you can get by with an average of 10 guys per day over 50 days, you can get quite cheap fishermen. But if you've got to get like 50 guys or 100 guys on one day, you're up here in this high marginal cost. The guy's like, I don't want to fish. It's like $150 an hour. Oh, all right. Right? So it's extremely expensive in capital, extremely expensive in labor. There's all of these boats that are all huddled around each other, right, around the fishing grounds. And they take whatever they can get, including really crappy fish, right? They get the bad size fish, the small fish. They get the wrong fish. They kill the wrong fish. That's where a lot of shark deaths and dolphin deaths occur around tuna fishing. So all of this kind of restrictions is a complete disaster. So what they've ended up doing in what the economists, this paper I told you that you would want to read, 1956, 50 years ago. Economists is like, hey, you know what? We can fix this. Let's do this. Let's do property rights, right? But notice the salmon fishery a year ago in California is already collapsing, right? So going from economics into the real world is often very difficult. But they have in fisheries, they have this thing called ITQs, individually tradable quotas. That's a type of property right. Basically what they do is they take the entire fishery, whatever that is, X, they divide it by N fishermen, and they say, your share for the individual I is going to be, one share, one fraction of the total. And that's yours. And you can't take more than that. That's the key. You can't take more. You've got a property right. So what these fishermen will do is say, wow, I'm feeling I want to go see a movie today. I'll go get my fish tomorrow. Right? Or I'll go get my fish when the weather is nice. Or when the crew is cheap. Or when I can use my brother's boat. Or when the price is high because it's whatever, Friday. Okay? So what they did with this ITQ is they completely broke down a huge problem of this. Right? Which is what you guys should have had in your game. Did you actually play a version of it where there was property rights? Yes. Yeah. So you say, okay, this is, everybody had their, it's supposed to be evenly divided, everybody had their little thing. Now, did the fish make it to the second round when there were property rights? Ah, good. If you learn nothing else in this class, learn that. It's really useful when you're talking about natural resources to talk about property rights. Okay? And there's problems with water It's like, it's the most, it just blows my mind constantly that we have problems with things that can be solved like that quickly. Then you have to ask, so why are we not solving it, right? And that's kind of the politics or the psychology, the culture of the institutions, but that's okay. We can still deal with those things and try and beat on them, and try and persuade people that it's probably in their best interest, right? In the best interest of the fishermen to allocate these property rights. Fishermen usually resist allocating property rights. They're like, no, no. And usually because they're like, I think it's part of it is, what's that Lake Wobegon effect? Every fisherman is above average. I can do better than the other guys. And they also are screwing themselves. Usually they're screwing the future, right? They're screwing their kids. Because they're destroying the fishing stock. It won't be there the next year. Same thing with water, same thing with timber, same thing with lots of other resources. Although the buffalo extinction was intentional. So, just so you know. Okay, so that's kind of what that game is all about. We'll be doing a few more games throughout the rest of the quarter. There will be candy involved, so get excited. One thing I forgot to ask when I was doing my little intro thing. I want to talk about like this kind of crazy question, like who wants to be an economist? Who wants to be an economist in this room? PhD in economics. Raise your hand if you want a PhD in economics. Okay. And by the way, I don't recommend it highly, but the thing is that what is it to be an economist is actually this really kind of, it's not my existential question, but it's important to think about what is economics. It's a way of looking at the world. Okay? Psychology is a way of looking at the world. Sociology, these are social sciences, right? Economics is one way. And so all of you who are not going to be PhD in economics, you're here to learn some tools, and hopefully you'll be able to use them all over the place in the rest of your life, right? So that's what I'm aiming at when I'm doing this class. So, and this is a big meta point about higher education at Berkeley, because people have told me like, oh God, there's so much math in this class, and like, because that, believe it or not, is for all those PhDs. None of you guys, right? Except that they teach it to you guys, which is why you're going, why am I learning this math? And don't worry, you're not supposed to learn it unless you want to go to get a PhD. Just learn it so you learn the concepts. That's the key idea. So that's my little editorial of the second. Now let's go to power. So, finish a sentence for me. Power corrupts and absolute power. Right. Okay. Now, what's the opposite of power? What's the way to diffuse power? Democracy. Disenfranchisement. Enfranchisement. Not disenfranchisement. Yeah. To actually, you mean to spread the power around, right? 50 states, for example. What else? Someone? What'd you say?
Fractioning the power.
Fractioning the power. Diffusion of power. That's what we want. The word we want to use. So if power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So in economics, we use a word called market power. What does that mean? What does it mean when you have market power?
You have the advantage.
What kind of advantage?
You have the supply that's in high demand.
A supply that's in high demand. Okay. And what do you do with that? So you have a supply and there's a high demand.
You can control the price.
You can raise the price. You can affect the price. Okay. What's a cloud? Give me an example of that. Companies. De Beers, classic. Diamond Cartel. Another one. Microsoft with their XP and Vista. See, what happened with Vista? Complete fail, right? And they tried to sell it, and the only places they could sell it were really kind of like central government purchasers, because they're like, whatever. They're spending someone else's money. Remember that tax wedge? That was your money. So, another company.
OPEC.
OPEC, another it's the oil cartel, organization of, oil producing economic, organization of petroleum exporting countries, organization of petroleum exporting countries, right, awesome. Next, iPhone, the Apple, there's a significant amount of market power, and I don't know what the deal is between Apple and AT&T, but AT&T must be giving Apple a huge amount of money, because like the number I switch, I'm like, fuck, I'm going to give that. Question? Example? Walmart. Does Walmart have market power? Do they have market power against you, the consumer? the suppliers, right? Now, the Walmart effect is really, this is like a massive, there's like so many economists studying Walmart because they like labor stuff, they control 20%, or control, they sell 20% of the retail market, so like every other grocery in the United States. It's crazy. But the one thing that Walmart does, it's kind of like this deal with the devil. If you're a Walmart supplier, you will be selling heavy volume, right? But you will be making like this much volume, right? And I went to Walmart, and I was like, wow. I came out with this huge shopping cart. It was like $80. I was like, wow, yeah, let's crap. It was really great. And then it all broke. So anyway, yeah.
Like Standard Oil?
Mm-hmm. The Standard Oil Trust, the classical case of buying it. Now, so there's a tension. So there's a tension between monopoly. And I'm going to call this monopoly not in the economic sense, but in the illegal sense. Antitrust, right? See how bad my handwriting is? Okay, there's a tension between monopoly and good business, isn't there? Competitive. I mean, is Apple like being unfair, exerting their market power by coming out with this phone? And poor Samsung can't catch up with them? Is that mean? And they're taking the market away from them and it's not fair? Or are they being competitive? There's a revisionist argument about Standard Oil, that they actually were just competitive. They just beat the crap out of all their competition and they took over everything, right? Because the example typically is, oh, what you're going to do is you're going to lower the price, you're going to drive out all the competition, and then you're going to raise the price. That's the classical analysis, if you want to call it that, of people that don't like market power. And so that was the idea, is that Standard Oil would just go in there and take over the world. And the key to this actually happening is what's called entry, right? If somebody can come in, they can enter the market, and they can start competing with you, then this strategy won't work. You lower the price, everybody goes out of business, then you raise your price, it's profitable to go back in business, you go back in business, right? So we have to have entry. And that's where we get into these terms like lock-in, or you would call it a 2-year phone contract, right? Or standards, which is that everybody knows how to use Windows, and so it's hard to switch. So there's always this tension back and forth between trying to hold on to this market power and at the same time be competitive, right? So, and that's why the case against Microsoft ultimately fell apart, besides some other politics, was that they couldn't show that it was actually abusing its monopoly position. The Europeans, they said, yes, they were abusing it by bundling, I think, Internet Explorer or Media Player or whatever. But the Americans took a more laissez-faire approach and said, we're not quite sure they're doing it, and it seems like it's competition or whatever. So, to get back to my main point, the opposite of market power is competition. And ironically, that applies to both economics and politics, right? If you've got the king, he's got market power. You don't like him, he kills you, right? That's a lot of market power. The USSR, the Chinese government is trying to wrestle with staying in power, and yet give their people freedom, or at least freedom to make money, right? So there's this tension between market power, I'm just going to call it power now. Power, or the way to destroy power is through competition, and that works in both economics and politics. And this is where I said before, political economy. These things go back and forth. Let me give you a good example of the historical evolution of this idea, at least as put forward by some economists. And what they said is, in the past, the world was human society was what they call. It was in what they call a natural state. NAT. And this is where politics and economics were the same thing. Right? That's where you've got the king in his castle, or whatever, and he owns everything. Right? He owns the economy, he owns the cows, he owns the forests, and everybody else is a serf. And he's the king, he's in charge of politics. Right? If he wants to have an election, he does, he elects himself. So you can actually see this. Is anybody from what's classified as a developing country? Anyone? Where?
Mexico City.
Mexico City,
Yeah.
a country of its own. Where?
India.
India, Jamaica, anywhere?
Pakistan,
Pakistan,
Armenia,
Armenia. From a developed country, European countries. Germany. America, everybody else from America? Slav, sorry. So, now you're from all these countries. Now think back to your country and think about those headlines in the newspapers where you say, politician, Germany, Gerhard Schroeder, right? He made this sweetheart deal with his Nord Stream. After, like 3 days after the Chancellor of Germany steps down, he becomes a board of director member of this pipeline deal for Russia. Russia's like the most corrupt place on the planet. And it's like, oh, it was in the interest of my country, and I'm doing it for patriotism. They're paying him shovel buckets of money so he can call up people on his little magic Rolodex. Politics, because he wants to use his political power to get economic power, right? And that might be happening in many, many places. You've got the business people who is like the guy who is or at least he was a while ago, the head of Madagascar, was the Dairy King. Dairy King, he was the yogurt king. And he had so much money, he got elected, right? So much money got elected. Where have I heard that before? Mayor Bloomberg, right? I don't need campaign contributions. I don't buy my election. I spend my own money, right? So there's back and forth between politics and economics, and you have to wonder, here's where the problem happens, when this starts to feed. When you use your political power to get money power, and use your money power to get political power. Because money and power, they're exchangeable, right? It's like the dollar and the euro, right? There's an exchange rate between money and power. And so that kind of makes it hard in terms of what we were worried about before, which is like competition, right? Because think of it this way: if what's that guy's name? Carlos Slim, is that his name? He's the guy who owns Mobile. Mobile, is that the name?
Mobile, yeah.
Carlos Slim, I think he's like the richest guy, certainly the richest guy in Mexico.
Yeah.
Maybe in like the world, he's really, really rich, right? Okay, so he is really rich, and he's just like a deal maker. All he wants to do is make deals. And now the thing is, he hasn't used his, as far as I know, he hasn't really used, he's like a multi-billionaire. Bill Gates, okay, so take Bill Gates. Has Bill Gates used his power to try and get economic or political power? Not really. He's kind of like putting a foundation or whatever. Is he what?
That is sort of a soft power.
It's a soft power.
Getting
Right?
your name out there and hopefully being acceptable and great and everybody will love you.
He's trying to redeem his reputation because of Windows and stuff. So, but the thing is that if you go to other countries where people have economic power, they will often go into politics, and then they use the political power to get more economic power. And they, they give. Indonesia was famous for this. Sukarno was in Indonesia. He put all of his kids in charge of this kid's in charge of the bank, this kid's in charge of the forest, this kid's in charge of the oil field, and the family's like, wow, I'm doing so well because I'm in charge of the oil field. It's like because you just got put there by your dads, right? You're like Lucky Sperm Club, right? So they're not smart. They didn't go compete in some open beauty contest to be the best administrator around. And so that is that cycle. And this is what's called the natural state. Just go back to caveman time. Whoever's got the muscles beats up everybody else, takes all the assets, and then becomes the king, and then it goes in that cycle. Now, what's the opposite of that? Open access society. This is just somebody's word for it, okay? And definitely by open access, I do not mean open access fishery. Although it's the same idea, right? We're not talking about tragedy of the commons here. We're talking about the idea that anybody can do it, right? And this is the back in the day when the Constitution of the United States was written. The idea was had to be. Did anybody know? Did they have a land holding requirement? They did?
Yeah.
For political office? White, land holding, literate, right? And they've expanded the franchise since then. Oh, male, right? I missed that one. And they expanded the franchise since then to give access to more people, to the point where we have Obama, who's a black president, right? And he had all, and he went through all kinds of other stuff. He's an example of an open access society, and there's many other examples. But what you want is you want to have open access in terms of politics, and you want to have open access in terms of economics. You want to have access to the market. You don't want to have to go through to get 15 licenses to open up your own coffee shop. Okay? They actually do. The World Bank has done studies on the transaction cost of opening a business. Is called doing business, and they say it's in the United States or most developed countries, England, Germany, whatever, not Italy. It'll take like say 5 days and $500 to start a business. Let's just say, right? You got to fill out 4 forms. You got to pay a fee. You got to put your name down. If you want to go to Angola and start the same business, for example, it'll take you 150 days. And let's forget the $500. Let's just say 3 days' wages, okay? Because we want to use the same denominator. The average wage might be $150. 3 days' wages and about 200 days' wages, right? So how easy is it to start a business in Angola? Not easy, right? So there's 2 ways of responding to this. 3 ways. Don't start a business, go into politics, or bribe whoever is out there who does approve these things. That's one of the reasons that corruption is continuing, is that you have massive transaction costs. Now, one of the things that's interesting about corruption, people they have two types of corruption. They call it grand corruption, which is kind of like where the government decides to award a defense contract to Boeing because Boeing paid them a $4 million bribe. That's corruption using other people's money. And there's little petty corruption where the guy pulls you over and says, you were speeding. And you're like, no, I'm not. And then he's like, I have a gun. And you're like, I was speeding. But you can get out of it for $20. Has anybody ever been asked for a bribe from a cop? In this country? Not in India. Yeah, it's kind of a way. Mexico?
Mexico City, yeah.
Mexico City, I only make $3 a day. Come on, help me out. My family, whatever. Nigeria, okay. I got asked for. It was funny. I got asked for a bribe. This guy, he thought he had me nailed. He found this bar of paste in my bag, and it was kind of like, ooh, it's paste. It could be hash. And it's like, ooh, yeah, I'm gonna get you, stupid American. And it was banana paste. So here's the thing that's interesting. The petty corruption. You say, oh, there's a thing called speed money. I pay a bribe. It just lets me get my business done. That's cool, right? But go back to the economics in one lesson. What does he say? Think of the implications, right? What?
It all adds up.
Not just that it all adds up, which is a massive problem because it's a tax on the whole economy. Like there's a whole underground economy, above ground economy. But more importantly, think about this idea of dynamics, right? If you are a cop and you're making your money from bribes for people breaking the laws, do you want more laws or fewer laws? You want more laws, right? To the point where in the Soviet Union you couldn't do anything without breaking a law. You couldn't, because there was a law against that and there's a law for it, right? So no matter what, and the tax inspectors right now in Russia are all about that. So that's what's called endogenous. Okay, this is a word. This is an important jargon word in economics. Right? Laws, in political economy, laws are endogenous. Does anybody know what endogenous, where the root word of endogenous is, or what that means? Can they define it? Yeah, that's right. Endo, and the opposite of endogenous is? Exogenous. Right? Exogenous means that all that stuff is fixed. Endogenous means it is inside the system, right? The system, it's changed inside the system. Exogenous means it's fixed from outside and it will not change. Okay? Now, if laws are endogenous, then you really have to think what's going on. When you did the fishing game, the rules were set down. Don't talk. Exogenous rules, right? If you were able to talk, what would you have said? Anybody?
Don't touch the fish.
Don't touch the fish because
They'll double.
they'll double. We'll have more next time. And more. Give me another thing you might say. What if someone touches a fish? What are you going to do? Hit him, right? Okay, so you could actually create, you guys, if we did not, I don't know if we should have done that actually, but it's not hard to imagine. If you were able to talk, you would have created an endogenous institution. Don't touch the fish. Very simple, right? You don't have to go through a bunch of math. You don't have to write a contract and say, just don't touch the fish, right? Then the next period, figuring out how to divide the fish would be a free-for-all, right? But that's okay. So those would be laws that were evolving in mid-place, endogenous. And the reason I'm using this word endogenous here is because the reason that these, it takes 150 days to start a business is because everybody's got their hand out, and they've made the laws to make more and more hands out. It's almost like the civil bureaucracy has expanded to get as many hands as possible in there. And what you're getting is this problem here. It's not open access, and those transaction costs that happen from all of these people trying to make their money off of you trying to start a business is that everything slows down and everybody's worse off. Okay? That, in a sense, is development economics in a nutshell, right? But it matters for things like resource economics, development economics as in how do countries develop into prosperity, but it matters in resource economics because of the very political nature, or the very political nature of resources like oil and timber, because usually there is a license, the government owns it, the land is owned by the people or whatever. We're not talking about water bottles that you can just walk away with. Okay, we're talking about stuff that can be captured and controlled and held by political powers, right? That's why almost every government on the planet has a licensing regime for oil, or minerals, or often for fish or not for fish. For water, same thing. They're all political. So when you get into this types of politics, you have to take you have to keep these ideas in your head. Don't worry about keeping it straight right now. I told you I'd be talking about stuff over and over again. But like, try and keep this going, this idea going in your head. This is the kind of dynamics that are going on in these societies, and they're affecting the resource and they're affecting the environment. Speaking of statics and dynamics, I haven't even gotten to theory and reality. It's so exciting. Do we want to, Faye, do we want to change the batteries?
I think 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, okay. So, so that's essentially my point. Now, my point in 50,000 words. Okay, so let's go talk about the theory versus reality. This is a short little point, but it's something that I'm going to keep pounding on. Not to make fun of economics, but also to point out where you have to be cautious, okay? Because the worst thing that you can do is get really cocky about your tool, and then your tool breaks. And then you end up in the hospital. So, and in fact, theory versus reality, so here's I'm just going to say, if you have the theory of economics, for example, we have one, I count on, I think 2 laws, and then maybe in this semester I might come up with more than one. One law, give me one law in economics, really famous. Not exactly, the shorter version of that. Yeah. Huh? No, it's not a law. Law of diminishing returns is one of them, right? Diminishing returns, which is that essentially, that's about, there's diminishing returns from two, this is a good thing to write down actually. Now we got 3 laws already. Law of diminishing returns. Now that applies to 2 areas. Which one? Somebody give me one of them. Anyone? Think of yourself. What are you? Consumers. What's the law of diminishing returns for a consumer? What does that mean? Marginal benefit is doing what? It's decreasing, right? So basically, it's marginal utility. That's our prime for calculus is falling, right? Or if you want to do it this way, change utility to change in the good x is less than 0. All right? That's the calculus idea, right? No, that's not right. It's a second prime. It's greater than 0. Utility is going up. Utility is going up, but it's going up at a diminishing pace. Less than 0. How's that for messy? Anyone? So your utility is going up, but it's going up at a diminishing pace, right? I have one ice cream cone, I'm very happy. I have a second ice cream cone, I'm happier, but I'm not twice as happy. I have a third ice cream cone, I'm still happier, but I'm not quite doing so well. Does that make sense? Right? That's essentially diminishing marginal utility. What's the other diminishing returns? Not with respect to consumers. Sorry? Manufacturing, basically. It's like, this is the same idea. So basically, what are these two things? If you want to go back to what you said before, whoops, that's a nice straight line. What you said before, I don't know what your name is, but you said before. The law of supply and demand, in a sense, is that the reason that demand slopes down is this. Right? The reason that supply slopes up is what? What does that supply curve represent? If this is a curve that is based on diminishing marginal utility, what is this one? Increasing marginal what? Cost, right. And the diminishing returns essentially comes from diminishing returns to your technology of production, which means that your costs are going up, right? It's just like the flip side of that. It's the inverse of that. And then there's another law. So my favorite is the law of demand. Which is based on the exact same concept, which is that as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, right? And then there's the law of unintended consequences, which kind of shows up everywhere in life. So here's the thing. This happens to be theory, right? And it actually happens, especially with these laws. And I'm using law in the sense that they're so robust that no one is going to disagree. It's like the law of gravity or whatever. So no one's disagreeing with this stuff. There's another theory which is completely disagreeable. The reality, this theory tends to match the reality. We tend to see these trends in aggregate, in macro. We tend to see that when the price of gasoline goes up, less gasoline is used. Or when the cost of internet communication falls, more internet is used. Or when the cost of manufacturing goes up, less and stuff. We tend to see these things in reality. Here's the problem. The problem is trying to measure it, right? It's like, well, and if has anybody ever run a business? Who's run a business? How do you set prices?
It was a pretty unsophisticated business.
But you had to set a price, right?
Yeah. Based on the amount of business we got, we would raise prices to where we got business.
Right, exactly. So it's like, okay, we're running to capacity, we're running below capacity, let's raise the price, for example. So, or we're running below because no one's coming in, we have to lower the price. So there's this really kind of, and there's this word, I'm going to use the word groping. There's this groping method of trying to figure your way out. What's going on? What's going on? You're in the dark room, you have no idea what's going on, you're trying to grope your way towards essentially equilibrium. Okay? And the whole, and I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Equilibrium is, we never get there. There's no equilibrium. In economics, we talk about P star, Q star. But we never get there. We trend towards equilibrium. But then something changes, and equilibrium is over here, and we move towards over here. So it's theoretically convenient to talk about equilibrium, but reality is that we never get there, and to know where you are, it's almost impossible, right? I mean, or it's much harder. Time out for battery switch. Everybody shows up with a bunch of gifts, and then it's like Christmas. You can't have Christmas every week, right? Because it would break down after a while. Okay, so we're on again, and we're back to theory, empirics, reality. So the empirics stuff, why does empirics matter? Why do we care about measuring elasticity, which we might get to today? What does elasticity mean? Right, so price elasticity is how much does demand change in response to a change in price. Now, there are dozens of economists who make their entire career measuring the elasticity of demand for pork. Right? That's their job. I'm the pork economist, I got elasticity. And it's like, they spend a lot of time, a lot of data, they come up with the result, there's like a 20-page report, and there's like a minus elasticity of pork equals minus 0.3, or whatever. Now that's the problem, or whatever. What if it's minus 0.5 or minus 0.2? If I told you the elasticity of pork was one of these three numbers, would you actually have any idea which is right? I don't. It's almost like, so this is the empirics. The theory is that the elasticity of pork is less than 0, right? As the price goes up, you demand less. That's the theory. We know that's true. The reality is, it's also less than 0. But the empirical stuff, how do you measure it? And is this just an academic, who cares kind of question? No, it's not, because it comes to policy questions, right? Because policymakers, they go to economists and they say, I want to know what the elasticity of pork is so I can make a law about the relationship between pork prices and chicken prices, whatever the hell they're doing, right? There's a big elasticity question with respect to this cash for clunkers thing, right? Did anybody pay attention to that? Anybody buy a new car, cash for clunkers? Anybody know somebody who did?
My parents.
Did they buy one?
Yeah.
Okay, so the cash for clunkers was some idea that you would trade in your old car that gets poor gas mileage and you would buy a new car that gets good gas mileage. And it was a, I don't know if it was a win-win or a win-win-win. It was save the environment, save the U.S. car companies. Of course, everybody bought Japanese cars.
Yeah.
Duh, right? I mean, it's like, I know why GM is bankrupt, because they suck. And some other win, I can't remember. But it was predicated on some person who said, if you offer this, then the people will go in the market and they'll buy these cars and it will change the life cycle dynamic of gasoline demand so that the earth is greener. And it's worth paying, whatever it was, $2 or $10 billion of government money to subsidize these car purchases. But the whole thing was based on some person's number called, if we do this program, we're going to save the earth. It was based on an empirical, an estimate, right? The theory, we know the theory is out there, but then what ended up happening is cash for clunkers was really just a way of shifting a lot of cars off of dealer lots, right? It had almost nothing to do with the environment, the green economy. It was great for people that took advantage of it. I need a car anyway. Hell, I'll take $3,000, $4,000. That's fine. I'll do that. But when you're talking about the politics and the economics, and you want to try and pull those pieces apart, this is where you got to pay attention. Is somebody using numbers here to justify essentially a political win, right? Because they need to sell, they actually want to make a profit, and they say, oh, but I'm actually saving the environment. When really the environment doesn't matter to them. Okay? This is the kind of thing I'm trying to describe to you, that why we have to pay attention to empirics. And numbers get thrown around. I mean, numbers, you know, forget 0.3. You'll have a number that will be 0.263. And that's going to be some number that someone's going to use, some economist will come up with, and it'll be used, literally used by political, what are those people called, that work for congressmen? Staffers. The staffers will say, oh, I've got a number, I'm going to write the law up and we'll put 0.263. Because, I mean, it doesn't even matter, you can use a random number generator sometimes, right? So the problem is that a lot of stuff gets done based on that, and I want you guys to be skeptical to say, why are you doing that? Step back and see what's going on here, right? The theory or the reality, more importantly. Where do the political contributions go? That's the reality, right? That's how the laws get made. All right, and here we go to statics versus dynamics in the last 15 minutes. So the section, if anybody looked at the syllabus, you would have saw that almost every lecture at the first half of the semester has statics next to it. And there's these letters, and this is like some attempt of my own to categorize stuff in classes. But what statics essentially has to do with, I'm going to describe it in many different ways over the course of the semester, but statics has to do with a lot of holding all else equal. Okay? So you might have the supply and the demand for beef, right? And we're saying, okay, so if we move supply like this, because of whatever reason, then we're going to see that the quantity and the prices are going to shift, the price is going up and the quantity is going in, and that's kind of like, and that's the marketplace, and we're going to go from, literally from one equilibrium to another. This is a very static world. It's a little bit boring. It's in some ways easier to understand, right? This is why we use it. We use it as a stepping stone. You can actually do math. You can come to have equations. You can have an answer. You can have a proof. Now, if you want to get into the dynamics of this, forget this stuff. Ask yourself, what caused this shift from S to S prime? What caused the shift? something out there, something happened, right? And it could be that people, that there was mad cow disease, and we had to cull off 20% of the herd. The supply curve shifted up, right? There's less beef at every price. So why did that happen? So that's kind of an explanation of what's behind the supply curve. Why did that happen, or what's the response? Oh, see, now we get into response. Oh, and then we start importing beef from another country, from Bolivia, or not Bolivia, Paraguay, or Uruguay, right? So then things start moving around. They start moving around a lot, right? And after a while, you're confused. Where are things going to end up? That's when you start thinking about dynamics, okay? And we start with the statics because it's easier to understand. I'm going to give you a classic example of dynamics, and that's coming from game theory. Who's heard of the prisoner's dilemma? Yay! Okay. So we're going to say this is going to be, what's it called? I'm going to say quiet and not quiet. Okay? So the prisoner's dilemma is based on two, it's a little bit contrived, but it's like the fishing game. Okay? Two guys get caught in a theft. They're put in separate interrogation cells, and the cops go to each of them and say, if you confess, I'm going to write these numbers down, right? If you confess, and your friend doesn't, how does it work? Payoffs, confess. I'm trying to explain the setup. I know the numbers. I'm trying to explain how the cops would talk to the guys. I'll just do the numbers and we'll find out how. I'll make up how the cops talk to them. So they're put in two different interrogation rooms, and they're told, you know, your brother next door is confessing against you. You better confess. Okay. So basically, if both of them confess, if they're not quiet, oh yeah, we did the crime, right? I did the crime, and he did the crime. Then they both will get -3 points, whatever. They go to jail for 3 years or $3 or whatever. Okay, so they're upset. If they both stay quiet and say no, we didn't do anything, then they both like go away and they're happy. They have a funny story, so they get their 2 points. But if one of them is not quiet and he basically says, yeah, he did it, and the other guy is quiet, he just says, I didn't do anything. So he basically, what's that called? He rats on his friend. So his so-called friend, right? If you rat on your friend, if this guy rats on his friend, then he gets 5 points. He gets they give him a massage and a cup of coffee and whatever. And this guy goes to jail for much longer because he takes the whole rap. Okay? That's why it's called so the prisoner's dilemma is what do you do? Right? And you can't talk. Right? And unfortunately, there's no reputation. If anybody knows prisoners, you know there's a huge reputation, right? If this guy talks and this guy goes to jail, he's dead, right? But this is a one-round game. So the problem is how to solve this game. Not how to. So here we know how to solve the game, but what to do, all right? And I'll get to what to do in a second. But how do you solve it? So if I'm this guy and I'm looking at these payoffs, and I say, well, if I am quiet and he is quiet, I get 2. But if he talks, I lose 5. Then I'll say this. Sorry. If I'm quiet, he has 2 choices. He either gets 2 or 5. So he's going to do this. If I'm not quiet, he either gets -5 or -3. So he's going to do this, right? Just if I do this, what's he going to do? Does that make sense to everybody? You will have to know this because this game theory is really useful for thinking about things, as contrived as it is. But if you don't get it immediately, I'll go slowly or go over it later. If I don't talk, if I rat and I'm not quiet, then he's either going to lose 5 or lose 3. Oh, I just did that. Sorry. If he does quiet, then I can either get 2 or 5. I'm going to do that. Oh, sorry. I'm going to do that. Right? And if he's not quiet, I'm either going to get -5 or -3. So I'm going to do that. How much did I do my text wrong? Oh, I didn't write. I didn't write. So basically, you end up with this as an answer. because it's individually rational to make those decisions. Remember, it's one round, right? If it were a 2-round game and there was reputation, they would immediately go to here because in the second, if they go here, they'd be dead in the second round, right? So this is the one to go to. So what you end up getting is actually the worst outcome, -6 social welfare, right? And versus 4 plus 4 social welfare, or 2 criminals welfare, right? And this is it's called a social dilemma, right? It's a social dilemma because they both want to be there. They really want to be there. But they have no real way of ensuring that they end up there. And so they end up actually in the worst world, right? Because these ones sum up to 0. Now this is what I'm going to call a dynamic situation, right? You're trying to sit there and say, if I do this and he does that, and I do this and he does that, and he does that and I do this, it's completely like it's a brain buster, right? Trying to figure out what to do. But this is a dynamic thing. Now the interesting thing is that when economists look at this, and I don't know who started it, it might have been a psychologist who started this example, or political scientists, I don't know the origin of it. But when economists go through this explanation of game theory, and they say, what are the payoffs, what are the rational actions to take, they say, oh, we're going to end up right here. Now here is the interesting part. When you go and do actual experiments with actual people, like you guys, like what I'm going to do in an hour, experimental economics, and you say, what are you guys going to do? You end up getting something like 60% of people show up here, right? Most of the economics students end up here because they know what to do. That's the problem. They learned exactly the right thing to do, except that everybody else on the planet doesn't do that. And then you have some coordination problems here, right? Some mixed couples. So the fact is that people out in the real world, this is economic theory, but this is reality. Okay? This is an important point. We actually are able to solve some of these social dilemmas, these cooperation games, right? And this is obviously just a game, but when you look outside and you see that, oh wow, people do pay their taxes, even though the chance of getting audited, their correct taxes, the chance of getting audited is like 0.5%, right? Oh wow, people do, some people has anybody ever had someone a hit and run and they leave a note on your car and they say, I'm sorry, I hit your car, here's my number? Does anybody ever have that? Did you leave a note?
Yeah.
See, this is spectacular, right? Because someone hit my car, no fucking note. They just left it and drove away, right? But this, so you're up here and the cool people, and I'm like, man, that guy hit my car, right? It sucks. So despite the fact that there's no economic incentive, right, or no rational incentive, or no rational reason, people are cooperating this way. And this is a significant point because mostly it's the reason we don't have civil war constantly, right? Because there's a lot of flex. We have a lot of. It's not just we don't obey the laws because they're laws. We obey the laws because of a long cultural, sociological, religious, everything you want to call it, tradition of doing the right thing. And doing the right thing often means taking care of each other. And I'm one of those people who thinks it's like an evolutionary psychology explanation. Because if you didn't do it, your tribe died, right? Because the other tribe that cooperated, they killed you, right? Because they were all cooperating. So let's. Let me say, don't put those chairs down. I got one more point on this thing. This table down. So I'm just going to say one thing about equilibrium again, just as to emphasize this thing. I was in a PhD level general equilibrium. Remember I said last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, stochastic dynamic computable general equilibrium, that jargon thing. And you had this whole class in advanced PhDs about general equilibrium. And after 20 classes, I was asking professors, okay, so this is equilibrium. When do we end up there? And the professor's like, oh, we never end up there. I was like, what are we doing this whole class? But we kind of circle around it. And then as I mentioned to you, it moves over here, right? And we go over there. So I want you to know that it's a convenient fiction. Equilibrium is a convenient fiction. The same way that Newtonian physics is a convenient fiction for most of the time, right? We know that Einsteinian physics is the real world, but we can get along with it. And actually, that's a bad example because Newtonian physics is really useful, and equilibrium almost never works. So, and that's kind of gets into the idea of a steady state. Do we ever get to a steady state, right? And that's something out of ecology, interesting question. We'll just kind of end it there. All right, so see you guys on Thursday. Office hours today at 3 o'clock.